come to understand what Christmas is all about. And I just want to ask you this morning, how many of you had a nativity scene that was set up at your house when you were little? How many of you had that happen in your home? All right, a good portion of you did. I remember my mom, we had a little nativity that she would set up, and it would be on a coffee table or what, and it would be this small display there. And I remember as a kid looking at that, the stable, the cow, the sheep, the Joseph and Mary, and there was the little baby Jesus, and typically the little baby Jesus would have a glow around its head, right? This little holy glow. And I think sometimes we fail to understand, as clean as that little manger scene was that sat there on our coffee table, and the one that probably you had at your house, it really wouldn't illustrate what it was like the day that Jesus was born. Because he came and he was born in a nasty, dirty, stable. Now, ancient tradition tells us that a stable was not made out of wood, but actually in those days a stable was a cave. And so what it was a parking garage for the people that would come to stay at the inn. They would come to the hotel, and their animals then would be parked into this cave or into this parking garage. Jesus was born in a parking garage. Now, I don't know what your garage is like, but my garage, there's typically dirty, oily rags. The smell in the garage is way different than it would be in your house. Unless your wife spends a lot of time out there, then it might not be like that. But typically, that's kind of like one of those things. She's like, that's your area. And so there's going to be some oil on the ground, maybe where we've thrown some cat litter down or what to soak up the oil. And yet there's just this garage smell to a garage, right? Unlike our garage, this was a parking garage for animals. And so animals, what you had there was feces, and you had, as we talked about last week here, we talked about with animals, you typically have fleas, and you have ticks, and you have other things that are oftentimes involved with animals. And these animals were not local animals. They were animals that were coming from all kinds of different areas of the region, because these animals were bringing the people that were coming to the census or to pay their taxes. So they were coming from all over the place. In this stable, in this cave, we find the King of Kings was born. Now, one of the things I hope that we never fail to understand is that Jesus, he is the King of Kings. He's the Son of God, and he deserves royal treatment. But that's not how he came. He came to this earth just like you and I entered into the world through birth of our mother. And Jesus came. And yet, as we oftentimes will find in these little manger scenes that we have a clean area that typically, and we watch the TV shows and all, and it's well lit, but I can only understand that in a cave it would be dark and musty and be that smell of its own. Have you ever been in a cave before? A cave, has its own little smell. And then you park a bunch of nasty old animals in there and let them do their thing. And in a manger, in this carved out cave in the side of this hill, there's straw, and where there's straw, there's rodents and bugs. And in this place, it was only lit either by candles or by lanterns, but it was low lit, so the lighting wasn't all that great. The smell wasn't that great, and it was a dirty old musty stable that Jesus came as just a baby. Now, I'm going to read this passage to you in Luke chapter 2, and if you would follow along, we'll have it on the screen, but it's in Luke chapter 2, verse 1. It says, "In those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered." This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth, to Judah, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem. And here's the reason why. Because he was of the house of the lineage of David. To be registered with Mary, his betrothed, or his fiancée, who was with child. Now understand this, that they were going because there was a census that had been decreed. And so, that's why they were there. And it goes on to say, and while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room, or there was no place for them in the inn. I want you to see here this morning, there's three things I believe that we can learn from this story. First of all, I want you to see that Mary had wrapped Jesus in cloth, or in strips of cloth. Now, again, last week I talked about this with our group, that Jesus was wrapped in swaddling clothes. That means strips of cloth, because in those days, and they still practice this in the Middle East, they wrap babies, they swaddled them for a number of reasons. One, it gives a sense of security. You understand that, right? When you had a little one in your home, you lay them in a blanket and you taco roll them, you tuck them real nice, like a taco, real tight, and there's just security for the little baby. But not only was it for that reason, but also they wrapped in swaddling clothes because it brought better circulation to the body. That was important. But then another thing is they would wrap them in swaddling clothes, just like today in the hospital a lot of times. They'll put little mittens on a baby in the hospital, right? And the reason they do that is to keep them from scratching their face up with their little nails. And so Jesus was wrapped in swaddling clothes and laid in a manger. Now, again, a manger, typically what we would think of as a manger is maybe a wood trough for animals to eat out of. But again, in those days, it would have been a carved out trough, which was called a manger, and it was a feeding trough. And a lot of times that would be carved out of the side of the wall there for the animals in the cave to be able to eat out of. Now again, keeping in mind, they laid him in a manger. This is a feeding trough. And it's not that feeding trough that you have there setting on your little coffee table or setting out in your front yard. It was truly a feeding trough where animals slobbered and all to eat their food out of it. It wasn't the cleanest situation. Certainly not a place for a king. It wasn't royalty. But it was real. The second thing that we can learn through this story is that Jesus, they placed him in this manger. So first, he was wrapped in swaddling clothes. Second, he was laid in this manger, this feeding trough, this dirty place that typically you wouldn't lay somebody. And one of the things I would like to highlight is in Hebrews chapter 4, and I'd like to share that with you. Let me get there. And in Hebrews chapter 4, in verse number 14, look at this verse. I'm going to give you verse number 14 and 15. It says, Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. What I want you to understand here is that Jesus, he is our high priest, but yet, even as our high priest, he is touched with our weaknesses, with our pain, with our agony, with our hurt. Now, I think sometimes we can look at the birth of Jesus and we can see the story of Jesus' birth and we can fail to understand the conditions that Jesus came in. But can I help you know this? We have certain expectations of God, don't we? We think things ought to be a certain way with God, don't we? And yet, God does not always do things the way we would expect him to do them. And in this case, Jesus was born in just a very lowly place, a place where the average person would never dream to be born, a parking garage. And they laid him there in the manger. And despite all the Christmas pictures that we see and that we're surrounded with, I don't want us to lose sight of the reality of the conditions that Jesus came into the world with. Then the third thing I would like you to see is that in the whole process of this, the reason he was born in a stable is because there was no room for him where? In the inn. Now, I just want you to think about that for just a moment. Because just in the day when Jesus was born, even still today, Jesus has come to give life, and that more abundant, to all who will receive him. And my question for you this morning, is there room for Jesus in your life? Or would you have to say, you know what? I don't have room for that right now. There's no room for Jesus in this place. I think all of us have to come to the reality of what Jesus experienced, and yet today that still echoes for us. Here's a little bit of something. I want you to just ponder on this and think about this. When Jesus was born, they wrapped him in cloths or in strips. When Jesus died for you, they wrapped him in cloths or in strips. When Jesus was born, they laid him in a cave. And when Jesus died for you, he was laid in a cave. And when Jesus was born, there was no room for him. And now that Jesus has died for you, I want to ask you, is there room for him in your life? Every head bowed and every eye closed this morning. I know today